Hello there, it's Aaron Wren. Welcome back to the podcast. My guest this week is Titus Techera. He is a writer and editor based in Budapest, Hungary. He has a Substack called The Postmodern Conservatism. I'll be able to put a link to that in the show notes. He also wrote an interesting article in Law and Liberty, which is a publication of the Liberty Fund. If you're not familiar with that, you should definitely check that out, called The Third Wave of Journalism. I'll also put a link to that in the show notes. And he had some interesting things to say about media. I love to talk about media, so I just wanted to get him on the podcast to talk about the media. What's going on with the media? What's the future of media, etc. Titus, thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Aaron. It's good to get on the show. As we used to say in the old days, long time listening, first time caller.
Okay, great. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you. I guess in your piece, you really break media into sort of three different categories: print, TV, radio, you think of broadcast, and then internet. How do these differ in your view in how they operate today?
I think it might be easiest to look at their, so to speak, their political function and therefore the historic development. Print is, of course, essential to the American Revolution. It's Sam Adams and Tom Paine and these pamphlets that can be mass-produced and distributed because of print. It means not just that 500,000 Americans can buy and or read things like Common Sense or the American Crisis, so on. But it also means that these are very easily transported things, and America, accordingly, of course, has for Postmaster General Ben Franklin, and the Postmaster General is mentioned in the Constitution because you can't run a territory like America for a population that's literate without posts. You have to be able to carry. It's amazing that paper is so light, actually, and it is so dense intellectually. So the character of the American Revolution would have been something very different without print technology, if it could have happened and been coordinated at all. After all, there's also committees of correspondence, part of the conspiratorial organization that made the revolution. But also as an education, where did all of these lawyers of the founding era figure out how to think about law, politics, and to coordinate institutionally, but also to plan out something that hadn't existed before, all of these sorts of legal designs, all of these systems of political institutions. You have to learn them somewhere. All of these things depend on print for the transmission through space and time of incredibly valuable, because incredibly rigorous intellectual pursuits. Now, granted, this democratized tremendously after, say, the founding, the pamphleteering, the partisan fights, the age of Jackson, and the massive increase in the electoral population of America, and so on and so forth. Print democratizes and democratizes and democratizes, but it does retain, even today, the notion that it is the only form of political communication that is, if not primarily, then should be primarily a matter of intellect, a matter of argument, a matter of marshalling evidence, observation, argument. And of course, the difference in our time is that the claims of intellect are almost entirely, as in the founding era, of a revolutionary character. We do not have, for example, in 2025, important writers and important publications that defend the major institutions. The Congress, the presidency, the various agencies that may or may not be under the executive authority, nobody can really tell, or so on. You can use argument to attack anything from the president to the election to the Supreme Court. It's almost impossible to use them to defend them. That's a very interesting fact. But since America is so revolutionary, it's not entirely out of character. And of course, it wasn't just the revolution; it was the Civil War. Practically speaking, Lincoln was not much of a politician. He's the perfect example of failing your way to the top, failing to get reelected as a congressman, failing to get elected as a senator, and then he becomes president. It's unique in American history, I guess. But as a writer, he was first rate before he turned 30, and he wrote and had his writings published and republished and spread out to, of course, primarily the political class, the Whigs in disarray looking for a new way to think about politics and the preparation for the conflict ahead. And he got it done through print. So something like regime change or regime level political transformation and print technology are, that's the American story. And so it's not so shocking that it's happening again today if you take this perspective. TV, radio are, of course, creatures of the 20th century, of the mass democracy, of the situation where, perhaps like in the Civil War, Americans no longer believe that they have a connection to the major institutions. Washington, D.C. can get, say, bigger and bigger. Federal authority can become ever more complicated. You can have all of these transformations of administration from the progressive era of TR, Taft, Woodrow Wilson, and so forth. But people don't believe in it. Partly, of course, it's also there's more and more Americans, and many of them are newer and newer Americans, all of the immigration that came before the First World War. But on the other hand, it's also that people are spreading throughout America, and the concerns of people in Oklahoma or somewhere out on the West Coast trying to make Seattle into a city, they don't have anything in common with the concerns of people in New York or Boston, the educational and publication capitals of America. And so there's a need for new technologies and for a new attitude to democracy. And so the mastery of radio that you see with FDR's fireside chats shows the understanding that the great politician of the times has to short circuit institutional paralysis and has to prove to people that politics and democracy really work out in the super complicated, very distant, rarefied, arcane system of arrangements between these few elite people 3,000 miles away if you're on the West Coast, or however you want to calculate these things. That's the major achievement. And that's also to say that radio is a way for a politician to prove to the elite institutions that he has the people behind him. Radio unifies. Radio, you could say, is the source of one American way of speaking. Why does everybody speak like they're Californians nowadays? It's radio that did it, and then TV. Before that, so many accents, many charming, some unintelligible, however you will categorize them, but we've homogenized. That is part of nationalization done through technology, and radio did it. Newspapers famously were, and to some extent I guess still are, localized geographically. It's interesting that even at the end of the sort of era of separate parts of America, it's still the New York Times or the New York Post. It's still the Wall Street Journal. They're not national exactly. This was original to America. There was a National Gazette 230 years ago. Now there's no such thing. They're somehow more localized. Radio didn't have that problem because it was so political. You can't have the president in the modern era run a newspaper or a social media. Truth Social isn't working out. Okay, how can it be global? But it could be Truth Social, 70 million people who vote Trump, but it doesn't work that way. But the president can grab the mic on the radio, on TV, and indeed on X or whatever it would be nowadays. So it is possible because that is an inherently democratic arena. It's not like print about intellectual concerns and the intellectual demands of reading through complicated things, piecing together all sorts of information, and thinking through the depth of an argument. It's much more democratic. You hear a voice of somebody who is trying his best to sound like you. So from the origins of radio to Joe Rogan, it's all about acting your hardest to seem ordinary, to seem like other people. You're not ordinary, but you have to sound that way. You have to have a warm, welcoming attitude. You have to be, or also, you can, if you think about the anger of radio from people think that Rush Limbaugh was a crazy and angry person. If you ask liberals, if you ask people on our side, he was just righteously indignant. But if you go back 90 years, it was Father Coughlin in the 30s doing the same thing on the radio. It was Reverend Fulton Sheen. Before he went on TV, he had a radio show. So the angry, the moralistic side of American rhetoric is also as old as radio, and it too is somehow about bringing people together, if in anger, not in the notion that America is a welcoming place. Everybody can find his place here. We're all in it together. But also the notion that we're all good and angry against the elites. That's the major function of radio, and to some extent, to the extent it's a political issue, TV. It's supposed to show everybody we're all watching the same thing at the same time. We are all in this together. And therefore, somebody who captures that attention can claim to speak for the people against the elite institutions in Washington. And I think that's another important thing to notice if we take this somewhat historical perspective, get a bit of distance on our situation. The development of new technologies, and therefore new technologies of political communication, always rehearses the American political idea of an attack of the country on the elite. It's Jefferson ran in 1800 against Washington D.C. Andrew Jackson literally ran in 1828 on claiming that the election had been stolen by a bunch of Congress critters in Washington D.C. who are an oligarchy, and so the people must speak against it. That was also the teaching of Lincoln or TR, Woodrow Wilson, FDR. They were all, however elite, they were against the Washington D.C. elite, against the educational elite to a certain extent. They were all reformers, therefore spoke for the people. And of course, Reagan, the famous phrase from the first inaugural, government is not part of the solution, government is the problem. That's also the discourse in which he says that heroes in America are pretty much everybody who is a working, successful, middle-class, suburban person, or working class. That's what it means, is the people versus Washington. And of course, it happened again, or it was attempted with both Obama and Trump. And so it's not an accident that the development of social media that was supposed to be elite tuning of popular opinion and very sophisticated control from the White House of opinion. Obama was the Silicon Valley presidency. He was always talking to Google, and these somewhat clownish figures who now have podcasts like Rhodes, Pod Save America famously, were trying to lie to the journalists who are young, uneducated people and get them to do propaganda for this administration. It didn't work out so well. And it ended with the shock of 2016, which suggests that maybe you can't manage these kinds of technologies from the White House, from however sophisticated and influential, because they're a lot more democratic than anybody wants to admit. But of course, the attempt of the Obama White House to control the narrative, as people now say, was itself an awareness that we are living through a technological revolution that is so democratic that you no longer need to deal with TV, with people who make a lot of money, who might end up millionaires at the end of their careers, have book deals, and people have to pretend to like them in Washington, D.C., somebody from the Washington Post or from ABC. No, you can go around that. You can, and in a way you must. You have to try and make friends in Silicon Valley because it's not enough to have friends in DC or NYC. The country is transforming. But of course, they badly underestimated how much the country was transforming, since the transformation is not obvious at the top.
Yeah, if you think about
there.
Yeah, if you think about that social media, certainly after the Trump election, they freaked out that they couldn't control it, and then they tried to control it. I mean, they kicked Trump off, basically everything, and then there was like mass censorship on all of these platforms. The Biden administration was directly telling Silicon Valley companies, social media companies, what to suppress. But even with all of that, it didn't work. It couldn't actually be controlled despite all of their efforts. And despite essentially even publicly abandoning the free speech ideal, there was something that they couldn't control on this.
Yeah, and some part of that is inherent in the technology. Unlike radio or TV or even print, digital is not exactly localized. We all have it on our laptops, on our phones. If you have AirPods, it's in your ears. But it's also something like the clouds around you. It's like having your own little halo that is this other world. And it's much harder to censor simply because everything is instantly recorded by machine. It's not something like, did your favorite show make it to syndication? Did they get to episode 100 and now you get the reruns? No, it's just instantly recorded and you can listen to it again tomorrow. Per impossibile, let's say somebody falls in love with this conversation of ours today. If that person wants to listen to it once a day, or just send it to his friends or collaborators or mom and dad, they can do it instantly at zero marginal cost.
Right, they could download a copy of it too.
Exactly. It's you want to keep it, it's yours. Do you want to share it? It's yours and whoever's you share it with. Do you want to search through it? Very easy to have timestamps as well. Now we're getting AI tools for summarizing, searching through video as well as audio. any number of crazy digital operations are so easily done. And that is all based on simple machine memory. And so that makes it very, very hard to delete. Everybody from the children who are supposedly digital natives to the politicians and celebrities who are in the business of looking or sounding like they're the good guys, all of these people, young and old, rich and poor, famous or striving, are shocked constantly by something surfacing from their old tweets, from their old Facebook posts, from something they may have said on a social media medium that people don't even think about anymore. It might be MySpace or something. And it keeps coming back to bite us. Of course, partly it's because America is about the future, not the past. Nobody looks backward. But partly it's because nobody was ready for machine memory. Every medium before was more or less instantly forgotten. What's last week's newspaper for, or yesterday's? We used to joke, right? It's for lining bird cages. It's for, I guess, in England, wrapping the fish in chips. I guess it would be a Philly cheesesteak maybe in America. But it's useless. Nobody cares. And so people had a kind of innocence about this stuff. Who would think that the past comes back to bite you? It happens all the time because the machines are recording everything. It's very hard for people to think that this is happening, to realize it when it does happen. They're shocked when it happens to them. And nevertheless, of course, at least on a polemical basis, we're all constantly searching through somebody else's past digital deeds and sayings to maybe cancel them. Cancellation is not so much a partisan issue or political issue. It's part of the technology. It's a matter of remembering the past and having it in a way in your face, and therefore the ability to confront somebody with his past. It's, if you will, an alternative to moral judgment. You're not allowed to be judgmental, but you could drag up the past. That's somehow acceptable. It's also prurient, it's gossipy, it's interesting, but it also brings a kind of authority. It's not just some gossiping person, it's the authority of the internet itself. This cloud that we're all surrounded by has spoken. You can bring up somebody's old tweets. I'm a writer, so I'm on X. You bring up those old posts, and that suddenly is a great rhetorical coup. You don't have to, it's like, I've got the goods, I've got the receipts, as they say. It makes it harder to cover up, in short. And so
if you think about, we think about this social media, it's kind of democratic nature. It's kind of protean. Its ability to like do all this muckraking, and the sort of print and broadcast media, this legacy media, they hate it. You mentioned, the monopoly that New York and DC had on the media has been broken. Now you have to talk to Silicon Valley. You have to do these things. It strikes me that the one thing that these legacy medias had versus the new internet media was sort of institutional credibility. We have editors, we have fact checkers, we're more rigorous. You never know if you can believe any of this stuff. The Democratic, right? There's nobody filtering it. We curate it, we do all that. And yet they actually seem to be deliberately trashing and destroying their own credibility. The one that really got me, this is just one example, but you see this all the time, is that, when Trump campaign came along against Kamala Harris, they were criticizing her ineffectiveness as the border czar. They called her the border czar. And all these media, fact check, she was never the border czar. Even though these same publications at the time in the past when she was named border czar had called her the border czar. Like, no, it's like your own reporting culture, the border czar. Now you're like trying to rewrite everything. Why do they do this?
Yeah, I think there are three related reasons for this problem, and my prediction, not that it's, I think, a shocking prediction, is that it's going to get a lot worse over the next couple of years. One reason, first of all, there's the generational change. There really is a digital generation, and these are not people in their 20s or 30s who are brought up with a kind of shame about lying. The manners of the WASPs are gone. I recommend to everyone just spend a couple of minutes reading a chapter or two, find it on Amazon, from this 2014 book by Charles Murray, a very waspy, eminent, venerable kind of guy, social scientist at Harvard. He wrote a style guide, not for clothes, but for manners, for conversation, for how to be a grown up and to succeed in business as a respectable man. And at some points, he stops and says, "Well, you shouldn't curse and so on." But he says, "I'm told there's an exception if you're in Silicon Valley. There's an exception if you're in America, Mr. Murray." Those days are gone. He gives as examples of style or paragons the Buckley brothers, James and William F. And grand old men that you can now see in our digital national memory, I guess, on YouTube, on firing line, or what have you, but hopelessly overcome by events, hopelessly overcome by democracy. You could say that now they look like romantic figures. Somehow they try to stand against the torrent of democracy, and there's something noble about that. But the manners shifted to the point where things like shame about lying disappeared, and therefore the worry. Make sure that what you say today and what you said yesterday match. Make sure that what you said 5 years ago and what you say today match disappeared. Although the characteristic of the medium is infinite, seemingly machine memory, perfect, cheap, free, easily transmitted, distributed, searched, etc. The use we make of it, of course, is all too democratic. Everybody has to post all the time. You should be chasing the next viral hit, is the inherent morality, not worrying about what you said yesterday. All the wins and losses are so temporary that the difference between truth and lying isn't that important. Nobody can believe that things stack up over time. What we do see, even with online celebrities, that they do rise and fall. Things do somehow stack up for you or against you. But the notion that you should be worrying about the future, what will people think of you 10 years from now? And therefore, you should always be worried about the past, i.e., that which precedes you, your reputation. It's, people don't quite think that way. The education seems to be in the other direction. Make a good impression. It's the optics. It's a kind of TV idea, but as the name YouTube says, you are now the TV. You have to be your own producer, your own talent. You have to be your own crew. You have to be your own camera, makeup, etc., what have you, to be an influencer. But people sign up for the job all the time. So there's this sort of race to the bottom temporarily, even in elite institutions, where you think that stupid people don't worry about the fundamental issues. And so smart people who know what stupid people like and don't like can't afford to worry about the fundamental issues because they have to get the attention of the ordinary people. And so it doesn't matter what institution you work for, you're chasing clicks. And but you're supposed to have some advantages. The New York Times matters, or some journalist in TV matters, and you make a lot more money than somebody on social media who just posts for fun or out of spite. And so you're supposed to make something of those advantages that maybe justifies them, maybe at least guarantees victory. But it doesn't work that way. Being part of an elite institution means by definition that you're really not involved in any of the events and the communities that could give you a good guess about what's going to happen in the future. The example I always give people about the opposite of that is Tom Wolfe. You can make your way into the institutions of the elite journalists of New York, but you should always be traveling around America, wondering about what crazy things Americans are doing. What use of freedom are these people making? What is the technology of the day? Is it cars? They're hot rodding into all of these crazy colors, shapes, etc. That matters. That says something about how Americans are going to fall in love with the car, with freedom, with technology, and so forth. Obviously, it's going to get industrialized, and you end up with all of these muscle cars, etc. But it tells you something about the nation, what people think freedom means. But so with everything else that he chased, story after story, including, of course, drugs and rock and roll. You have to figure out what people are doing, but that means don't be in an elite institution or don't be trapped there at any rate. Whereas people who are in elite institutions, they have to press the advantages of position that gives you. You're at least shouting from the top down, and so the sound carries. But you always have a lot more to lose than you have to gain. And so, strangely enough, I don't think people really understand this because they like to look at people in elite institutions and say these are arrogant bastards. I would suggest that the proper way to understand them is that they're desperate bastards. It's like it's it's funny. You climb your way to the top of world media or world historical media, only to realize it's a sinking ship or a falling. The skyscraper is collapsing under its own weight, and you're trying to eke out whatever success you can while you can, because you can't stop. It doesn't matter if you can see the black wall in front of you. It doesn't matter if you know the inevitable will come for you, because you still have to act today. You still have to put out something today and tomorrow and next week. And so the only thing you can do is burn the credibility. Burning down the institution to keep warm, so to speak, is what's been happening for a couple of years. And I don't believe there's any sign of stopping. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect it to stop, because on the one hand, the generational thing hasn't shifted. These are younger people who are kind of desperados, kind of shameless about truth and lying, and don't really think there's any better way ahead. None of them believe that there's a future that they could live up to. Prove yourself day in, day out, earn your rep, and then there will be rewards, there will be more stability. They don't think there's any such thing, because the experience of climbing into elite institution is you see 10 people to the left of you, 10 people to the right of you in any class, interview, whatever, very selective, and you have to find some way to get rid of those other guys. They're not going to make it. You have to make it. That's not the attitude that makes institution builders or team players. It's free agents all day, every day. So this generational issue is actually very hard to shift. The oddity is that the technological issue itself should be a great help. It's a digital technology, because it's records so much data. It has such a good picture of somebody, and such a good picture of the world. Digital media means you can just go on Google Maps and pick your favorite restaurant, but you could also be Googling the best plumber in your town, or whatever else you'd need that's localized by skill, by geography, by availability, etc., price range. You have incredible data, and so it should be the easiest thing to localize a community. Who are the people who are interested in paying for what you're selling? And this is true not just of restaurants, but it should be true of magazines. But nobody has made it work yet. Seems like thinking about these kinds of questions about what are the inherent characteristics of the technology. There's you pay a price for getting strivers who are fundamentally uneducated. None of these people have thoughts. They know how to react to all sorts of things, but they don't understand that these are questions. And so it's hard. But at the third level, people can experience that this is a weird change. Too many things are changing at the same time. It's a new technology, but there's all these foreign problems, but there's also economic problems, but there's also all of these weird things with the new generation. Why are they getting married, or why are men and women so unhappy about one another? Too many things are changing at once. And so again, the solution would be to say what principles of localization can make a community. And this is what technology is supposed to do. Like, there's a reason so many people like Rogan. It's a reassuring, confident man. Granted, he's sort of he's not Mr. Moral. He's not a good liberal. He's not a good Christian, etc. But precisely in a way, for that reason, he's outside of the institutions. Seems like he's all American. He's Huck Finn. He made it by himself, and therefore you can rely on him. He's not a creature of incentives. He was not made by corporate striving. He was not made by elite institutions that are kind of about backstabbing and gossip. He's himself. He made it by himself, and therefore you can rely on him. Here is somebody you can trust. What is it about him that you can trust? It is that, like Huck Finn, he's an American. He's just
you mentioned Rogan. I want to get your take on how two people in particular fall into this sort of analysis of sort of outside people versus the two people who've been extremely effective. One of them is Chris Rufo, who I believe you do some work with. Chris Rufo, who's come in. He's more activist than journalist. He's sort of a jack of all trades on that, but he's been super effective at moving the needle on making institutions do things out, without having the New York Times megaphone to sort of shame you into adopting ESG or something like that. And then the other one is Elon Musk, who's turned his Twitter account to, now he's creating political crises for leaders in Europe just by tweeting about stuff. How do you think about those two guys? What do they tell us about the landscape here?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Rufo is a friend. We work together closely for maybe a year and a half now. I worked on some of his press campaigns. I'm working with him on a lot of his writing on strategy. So here I can speak with more confidence, but also, of course, I'm not just working with Chris. He's a friend. I am for him. I'm with all the biases of friendship. So I think he was the first to show conservatives that you can outdo liberals at their own game. American media tends to be about exposés, exposing corruption, because it's very, very hard to persuade Americans that there's such a thing as principled opposition. The normal American answer to finding out that the neighbors are liberals is moving, or if the neighbors are conservatives, then you move. So this is the great sort, of course, that since the 90s at least has taken the nation by storm without getting any media or serious attention, strangely enough. What are called landslide and super landslide counties in electoral demographics, counties that go by 20 or 40 points one way, that are therefore untouchable politically, are also very good measures of how Americans move around. And so even at county level, not just at state levels, Americans separate. Now, for media, that means that it's very, very hard to believe that there are people who disagree with you politically, but who are nice guys. It's much preferable instead to think, look, they're probably corrupt, they're doing this for the money, there's some kind of interest somewhere, and so you should get an expose on how bad people you disagree with are. This is how American media, of course, largely works. That's, it's not perfect, but it's the national character, so you probably have to go with the grain in these cases and make the best of it. But Chris was the first to show that you could do that to liberals at the highest level of prestige. Not on stories that are maybe local or small beer, but on national stories. And therefore help the wounded ego of the American conservatives show that unlike Republicans, you're not a coward, but unlike conservatives, you're not a loser. That's unfortunately the reputation. Right? Conservatives tend to like celebrities because they have this feeling that they're somehow losers. Celebrities maybe can take them out of it. Republicans like whenever somebody shows up and seems to be a fighter, Reagan, for example, because they know that they themselves are cowards. They would never do or say what Reagan did. So, hire this guy, hire a crazy person. Just anybody. Again, our national past is on the internet. Just go and look at the 10-minute ad Reagan cut, as best I can tell, against Goldwater's will for the Barry Goldwater campaign. It's called A Time for Choosing. 9 minutes and a half or something like that. He sounds like a crazy person, even compared to the Reagan president. People wouldn't talk like that today. It was in a way a freer country. But on the other hand, if you listen to him, just, okay, it's not Reagan, you would say, okay, that's actually J.D. Vance, that's actually Donald Trump, that's actually this brand of conservatism of our time. Like, there's a lot more constancy to who we are. But it did not have media and political representation. And this is what Chris is exploiting. This is why he worked so well together with Governor DeSantis, who is a guy who is a lot angrier and a lot more belligerent than he lets show, but who wants to get these changes done. Transform a college, transform the law about education, so on and so forth. You have to get nasty about these things. You have to have a fight. And so you hire a fighter. And so this is why Chris has been successful at this. And then with the pride of not being a loser anymore, if you can take down the president of Harvard or be part of the process, then that matters. It's very important to show that you're not scared of these people, or that being a top America is not being in control of America. That being super rich, super successful, super sophisticated doesn't mean that you're superior to ordinary American citizens. And nobody's above the law, if you will. And there's a reason these are much more like questions of law. You judge character and you condemn people, and you're supposed to destroy their careers. It's not about being nice. It's not about wagging a finger at somebody or saying your argument is not as good as my argument. You also have to fire those people and publicly humiliate them, which is something conservatives almost never have the taste for. And Republicans to some extent do, but it tends to be very rare. It's somehow you're supposed to, as you work your way up in an institution and in politics, become a lot nicer. Partly, I guess that's just because middle-aged people don't have the passions of young men, old people, even less so, etc. But partly it's some kind of belief that over time, things will be okay. But of course, once it turns out that maybe over time what happens is people want to talk to your child about being transgender, it's not going to be okay. Maybe what's going to happen is a lot uglier. And so, the waspy opinions that were inherited by the Republican Party and formed the manners, which in many ways should be retrieved. They're much better than they get credit for right now. And perhaps in the near future, their appeal will return. Though I think there's going to be a lot of interest in them because they're the most dignified class, ruling class in America or managing class in America. And because conservatives, like it or not, have ended up being the party of men rather than women. And the appeal of WASPs is the appeal of a man who has confidence, who judges himself by his peers, who has self-respect. And that's, I think, the future of the right-wing coalition, at least the managing element, the middling element. But for a while, obviously, they've had a very bad reputation because WASPs were identified as cowards who are either made to seem like squares by cool liberals like Bill Clinton, or they are humiliated morally by not so cool but more arrogant liberals like Barack Obama. Right? Barack Obama speaks. Bill Clinton spoke like a good old boy, but of course, one from Yale and Oxford. But Barack Obama spoke like everybody's supposed to in Black America, like a Black Protestant preacher. The cadences of Barack Obama are the same as of, if you will, the comedian Chris Rock. I think they're about the same generation. But of course, the comedians do this, or Richard Pryor or whoever, to mock the authority in Black communities, the Protestant preachers. Obama did it to have a moral importance and therefore to impress liberals and to look down on the Republicans of America, as though suggesting that by his very rhetoric and demeanor, that liberals have the moral high ground, and Republicans, compared to that, are just losers. They don't have any moral credibility. They cannot say anything serious about justice. They will not therefore fight for anything or defend anything. And so, there's always therefore this problem that people on the right seem defenseless rhetorically and therefore politically. And that's what discredited the WASP manners. They cannot be cooler than Bill Clinton. They cannot be as morally impressive or haughty as Barack Obama. What can they do? They cannot claim historical firsts for women or for whatever else minorities. Okay, what can they do? Where is it that these waspy sort of Republicans, the McCains or Mitt Romneys, right? Mitt Romney is obviously a very Mormon, but like so many Mormons, worked harder than hard to seem like an all-American WASP, right? It's
And you say that Rufo basically broke out of this mold,
yeah,
and
the first to say, let's make a scandal, and follow up by saying, let's fundraise off of that scandal. Republicans are terrified of scandal. First of all, your boss will fire you, your friends will betray you or run away, and what are you going to do when you don't have a livelihood?
it seems
And
like
so,
Elon does sort of the same thing, where he tries to create scandals, and he just doesn't really seem to care what anybody thinks. I mean, he's definitely not a paragon of WASP decorum by any means.
exactly, and it's the Elon is, I think, paradigmatic of something that will be the future of America. These sorts of, Americans are forever looking for who's a man, and the answer in the last decade or so had turned out to be that it's only these very manicured athletes. It's going to be LeBron James. It's going to be this Travis Kelce guy from the Kansas City Chiefs, these kinds of people. But it turned out partly, say, COVID or nowadays sports betting, that they're all cowards, that all the legends of American sports are supposed to be manly man, somewhat stoic, but very generous. All of them obviously have to have some kind of non-profit charitable foundation. All of these people turned out to be complete conformists, and they would sell out for anything, including selling out their male clientele for the sake of sports betting. You're a multimillionaire. How dare you behave this way to ordinary, often poor people, many misguided? It's crazy. It's un-American. The notion that the rich should profit from the poor this way, instead of showing any kind of charity or at least brotherhood, it's shocking. But now it seems like all the moral hierarchies are falling apart. So you don't have to be some kind of moral figure. Or you could claim to be a moral figure and still get involved in sports betting. Why not? So, it's a weird situation. But this did not change the fact that Americans want to find male heroes. And the result has been that there's only one last group of people who have all of the male impulses that were once, the creatures of westerns or of the cop shows, of the action movies. And those are the Silicon Valley nerds and geeks. It's they're also called the Aspergery or autists. What does that mean? It means that they don't care about social cues. It means that they don't care about social morality. You can find the new Rogan interview with Zuckerberg, where Zuckerberg, who is the most effete of all of these people who made it, talks about how creepy it is that modern corporate culture is effeminate and emasculated. And he says that he once he started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, he started asking himself, where was this all my life? Finally,
Maybe he started supplementing testosterone too. You never know. Something like
probably. And I promise you, this will be not just an industry. This will be a part of respectable manners for American men in middle age to supplement testosterone. I'm not kidding. People will eventually see that the use of Joe Rogan is teaching people how to lose weight, take supplements. Everybody should be taking vitamin D, things like that. Everybody should be taking, I don't know what.
I'm taking my vitamin D. I'm taking.
Everybody will do more of it, and they will realize that what they want out of it is basic powers: health, strength, control over your day, control over your sleep, not feeling like you're a victim of circumstances. It's looking it's a little like the scene in The Godfather when the Godfather slaps that singer. Be a man. You have to sort of do it yourself a little, and then you go to the gym and you realize these other guys in the gym also somehow realize that there's a few men left in America. They're all under the gun, and they therefore should all be friends. They should all be helping each other.
I like this idea of having, something that's, not so driven by what would the neighbors think. At the same time, if you combine that with this ethos of it doesn't matter if there's a truth or a lie, that's not good. I think we do have to, it can't just be we won the amoral power game. There has to be something that anchors it in truth. And so I actually want to conclude with that, because there was one line in the article that you wrote, and I just like to get your take on it, because it seems like that's actually a little bit what you're saying. And so maybe talk about the importance of truth. We have the styles and all these kind of technological impacts. The importance of truth. You wrote, we must learn that to be properly political, journalism must do more than merely address partisans. It must help them achieve political victory in the constitutional arrangements that define American culture. It has to be about enlightenment more than propaganda. And I do think maybe this talks about being effective, learning how to be effective. But even effectiveness is a form of truth. There has to be like something, what is the truth? What is the criticality of truth and style as sort of the last bit here?
Yeah, I think this is something we're sort of all building towards. The social media is kind of conflict between trying to sell people on whatever fantasy you can dig up, and on the other hand, the attempt to put together a community around some idea, around some common pursuit, an attempt therefore to discover the character, and ultimately that's national character. The anchor of a political culture in America is, on the one hand, people have to be on the side of the constitutional arrangement, and on the other hand, they have to find a connection between that and the national character. And right now, people don't know what it means to be American. There's a question, what do you think that's like? I would contend that the only figure in America that really is unifying is Trump. Not just because everybody either loves him or hates him, but has an opinion about him. But they love him and hate him because they identify the same kind of American guy. He's a bit weird in his contradictions, that he's all about Las Vegas or what have you, but on the other hand, he's a teetotaler and would never touch any of these sorts of drugs. It's unimaginable that Trump is going to start smoking pot or these sorts of things that are ruining teenagers. Very American. It's all about the pleasure, but it's also all about the business and the money. Weird, but very American. But the point is that people see Trump's character and all of the bullshit and his odd way of talking, all of that adds up to thinking, I know this guy. That Trump doesn't have it in him to somehow sneak one past you. He can't hide. He can't shut up long enough. He can't hide. He doesn't know the moralistic lies to tell, or he doesn't care about them. He thinks maybe he doesn't need them, that he's above that. And so he wouldn't deceive you in the way so many elites continuously try to deceive you. And so that's what people call the honesty, the authenticity of Trump. The point is that everybody can tell, okay, this is America. Granted, it's somewhat caricatural, but populist leaders are always caricatural, because caricature is the only way to say, no, this is the truth about who we are. Okay, some of it is the ugly truth, but it is who we are. You can finally touch something solid that won't shapeshift on you, that won't somehow sneak up on you, that won't deceive you. It's something you can finally trust. But social media is all about that. It's trying to build character, not elevated character necessarily, but reliable character. It's partly reliable because it's crowdsourced. It's millions of people who have to agree on certain things, and they can't orchestrate some grand lie. It's not possible. It's just ordinary Americans who want to agree on some things. And so that's part of the search for the truth, primarily through character. And it's also a search for the truth based on the sense that there's probably a very ugly truth we're not willing to face. I recommend to everyone read this strange op-ed / manifesto written by Peter Thiel in Financial Times a day or two back. Of course, Peter Thiel is another one of these Silicon Valley billionaires, sort of autistic. He was the first rich guy to go.
Right. This is the Truth and Reconciliation op-ed.
Exactly, where he talks about apocalypse, the revelation, the end of blindness. We have to face that there are terrible things that are going wrong, and we have to fix it. The thinking there is that we have to go through scandal after scandal up until we're strong enough to face the fact that this is not the country we wanted. This is not the country we're promised, that somebody did something weird. It's not normal for America to have this enormous national debt, for example. You can't say, no, it's always been this way. In my lifetime, it wasn't this way. Before 2000, it wasn't this way. What are we talking about? This is crazy. But now people pretend that this is eternity. No, it's just some crazy thing that since 2008 has gotten out of hand. So there is a systematic lie. Now, granted, that also means that there's a kind of conspiracy of silence, as the phrase had it. I think that's, I'm sorry, I can't place it now. That is, we are not strong enough to face it, because we're worried. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for what changes we would have to make? I'm scared. But it's only the scandals and the conflicts that strengthen people, partly because you see, okay, we've survived, relief, but partly because they create leaders. It was only the scandals that brought forth Trump, that brought forth Elon Musk, a guy that, liberals had to humiliate this guy every which way possible before he picked up arms. Elon Musk is literally like those people in the Westerns who are strong men who never want to get involved in somebody else's life, out of contempt primarily, and boredom, but then they're forced to. And so liberals went a little too far. One of these women who were sort of his wife sent his firstborn son, very biblical, to this very expensive Harvard Prices school in LA, where they transed him. And after they transed his son, it was never going to be the same again. And I don't think people understood that they screwed with the wrong guy there. Some people you can do that to them, but apparently not to this guy. And it's important not to misjudge the characters, especially of billionaires. But generally, don't misjudge character. There will be consequences. And they misjudged him. They didn't understand how strongly he felt about whatever he thinks he understands of American character. And once they transed his son, he went on the warpath. And he learned that every time these people do something bad to you, you have to make a scandal out of it. Go public, no secrets, no hiding, whatever happened at that school. Go public, hit hard, hit fast, and relentlessly. And all of that is based on the belief that the American people basically distinguish right from wrong. That the teaching of natural rights that is the core of the American Declaration and Constitution is also something in everyday life. It's something like nobody wants to be played for a sucker, nobody wants to be abused, nobody feels that they just have to take it. People believe that they have certain rights. So everybody at some point in his head says to himself, who do you think you are? What do you take me for? But you need the kinds of leaders who articulate that and who go from that moment of indignation and then the recognition that something important about our dignity is on the line, to figuring out what is a specific issue that we can solve that we must deal with now. What is that indignation has to point to a real problem, but also to an urgency. It has to be a problem we deal with now. Unfortunately, the national debt does not have that character. But other things like free speech. How do you feel about succeeding in elite America only to feel that you're so humiliated because you can never open your mouth? Americans run their mouths all the time. It's a national passion. But if you're successful, you never can. And you end up feeling humiliated by mediocrities who lord it over you and wag their fingers and schoolmarm you. And you end up with this sort of feminine style that you baby talk to people, but you start screaming hysterically if they disagree. It's like, what is that? And a lot of these people decided step by step that they've had enough. And at first, none of them thought that they're just like Donald Trump because he seems like he's a crazy person. But they all learned that he was just ahead of the curve. And they all ended up embracing him as not because, he's specifically him, but because of what specifically he did. Show American character. You're not supposed to let people humiliate you. You're not supposed to let people walk all over you. Rights are not rights if you don't stand up for them. And nobody will do that. All the institutional power is on the sides. Like, why do people in the media or think about the courts of law, another very waspy thing, why do they lie all the time? If you can do this stuff to Donald Trump, this odd payment to, I guess, the porn star was split into 34 different federal charges because there were 34 installments. Each one is now a charge so that you can say he's a convicted felon on 34 felonies. Are you insane? Who do you believe you can lie to with these things? We no longer live in a world where people can't find out. Just ask ChatGPT, what are the felonies? What was he convicted of? It's immediately obvious that these people play with rules as though they're somehow in charge of everybody else's life, that making it to your institution in the media or in courts of law or whatever, in politics, in the Democratic Party, you can just lie to people continuously all the time with no consequences. So the latest now is these people at Pod Save America saying that they want to raise money for the victims in California, for the fires in LA. So just donate to this thing. But it turns out it's not a charity of 501c3. It's their 501c4, which is partly a political activist thing. And it reroutes you to Act Blue, which is the Democrat Party platform for fundraising, which takes about 4% of any donation anyway. And they get your data in the business. And they think you can always get away with these things forever. But this is not true anymore. There is too much conflict in human beings. There is too much opposition. Any doctrine will generate opposition for them to be able to get away with this stuff.
Well, that's I think that's a good place to end. People can't get away with it anymore the way they used to. The internet has changed the game. And I think you're right that people like Trump and Rufo and Elon have showed a model that's now being attractive to other people, like Zuckerberg. He said, why can't I do this? I'm a billionaire. I have a company. So again, Titus Techera, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. There's links to all of his stuff in the show notes. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, Aaron. All the best.